Right, so thanks a lot for coming to the book launch. I'm highly grateful to you, considering that most of you were working and it's a working day, but still you managed to get the time, so I'm highly obliged to you and really grateful to you for taking the time out. Now, before I delve into the presentation, I want to start off on a story which is written in the magnus opus of Plato, The Republic, probably one of the most well-read books in the world. Arguably can be called as the magnus opus of humanity even. So in the book, Plato describes a story of Socrates while he was sitting with his fellow mates, and he asks, what is justice? Now, there was a guy named Syphilis who was almost of the same age as Socrates, and he goes, justice is paying your dues, paying what is owed to you. To which Socrates replies that if really justice is paying your own debts, then how would you explain a situation where a person comes and deposits his weapon to you, goes away, loses his mind, loses the insanity, comes back and asks for the weapon? To this, Syphilis said that I would not give the weapon back. But then he said that your definition of justice is paying your dues, paying your debt. So, is this really justice? Along with Syphilis, there was a guy, Polemarchus. He takes a dig at the definition of justice. And he says, justice is doing good to your friends and harming your enemies. Socrates, the kind of contrarian he was, he goes and says that if that is the definition of justice, then justice should be standalone. Doing good or bad is inherent in the person, not something that we do based on the situation we are. After that, Plato's brother Thrasymachus takes a dig at the definition of justice. And he says that justice is what the powerful say. He says that whatever the leaders, the people who are in power, they tell, that becomes justice. Now what Socrates replied to that, I'm going to come at the end of the presentation. Now, usually the book launch events that I have attended so far, usually the author comes and they start speaking or they start reading a chapter from the book. Or they bring the panel and they start discussing about the book. But since I'm a corporate professional, I've been trained to make PowerPoint, so you will be disappointed to see that this book launch event is going to be a PPT presentation again. Please excuse me for doing that. Now, I want to start off with the history of Homo sapiens, the start of humanity. Everything has to be understood from where it all began. The genesis of us, we humans. We do know that humanity started around 200,000 years ago. But were humans really the dominant species on Earth? No, we were not. In fact, we were one of the weakest mammals on planet Earth. Life was a struggle for us. We hardly managed to survive. Before Homo sapiens, there were Homo erectus, there were Homo neanderthals, there were Homo habilis. All struggled. They are extinct now because Homo sapiens is inherently weak. But in the words of Yuval Noah Harari in his famous book Sapiens, he said that 70,000 years ago, we had a cognitive revolution. A revolution which changed us. A revolution which triggered a change, which helped us to become the dominant species on Earth. And what it did was that it brought people from across different races together to form coordination, to form corporations, to form vast association of people. And when they all came together, that is when humanity really started to take over the world. Today, no species on earth can form associations as big as Homo sapiens can do. Our cooperation spans thousands, millions, sometimes even billions. Today, the population of China and India is well above 1 billion. And all these people have come together to form a country. So, our association made the cities, made civilizations, which other Homo species could not do. If we explore other species, we see that our closest relative, chimpanzees, they can form cooperation up until 149. They cannot go beyond 149. But humans have the tendency to form these corporations. And what it did, it triggered first the agricultural revolution around 12,000 years ago. It then triggered the scientific revolution about 500 years ago. Today, we are at the cusp of AI revolution, but all that has been made possible mainly because we had a cognitive revolution. We learned the art of cooperating with each other. We learned how to form vast association of people. However, when these people started working, started cooperating with each other, one question came out, and that was, who is going to lead this vast association of people? Someone has to lead it. And that is the dilemma that I am trying to solve in this book. That who should be the leader? Who should have the power? Now, when I look at the leadership, the question is, the leaders are the ones who have the power to do so. No leader can claim to have leadership position without the requisite power to do so. Now, when I say the word power, it may spook few people, mainly because power is seen as a taboo, sort of an evil and cruel phenomena. But is power really that bad? Is power really cruel? If that is the case, then how would we explain the case of Nelson Mandela, who used his power to bring social equality in South Africa? When we analyze it closely, we understand that power is a very neutral phenomenon. It is just like fire. You can use fire to keep yourself warm during winter. And you can use the same fire to torch the whole house that you're living in. But is fire to be blamed for that? Or a person using fire to be blamed for that? Unfortunately, most of the people have taken the route of blaming the power when power is itself a very neutral phenomenon. Power does not tell anyone to do bad things. And to make matters worse, there are people like George Orwell in their famous Animal Farm. They started ridiculing power. People like Lord Acton, they said power corrupts. There are people like Mirza Aslam Beg who wrote a whole book, Compulsions of Power, as if power is something that makes you evil. But then, when we start analyzing history, we see for every Hitler, we have a Martin Luther King. For every Mussolini, we have Mahatma Gandhi, who used his tremendous power to lead a massive Satyagraha movement. So the fact is power to be blamed or something else we need to analyze? Now usually, the course of action that the philosophers have taken is look leadership in isolation. They talk about leadership. And this is the first thing that is taught in the leadership course. In any leadership course, we are taught there are 6 types of leadership, starting from very coercive one to very humbling ones. But is that really the way that we talk about leadership? When we know that leaders are those who have the power to do so. So without teaching what power is, how to use power, how power is constructed, we have started dwelling into the leadership. And that is where I want to bring your attention that in order to become the leader, you first of all have to understand the power, the concept of power. The dilemma that humanity has faced is that the subject of sociology, which talks about these concepts, the leadership, the power, that subject was invented hardly 100 years ago. That was the time when humanity had already understood the atomic model. Niels Bohr had already given us a postulate on how atomic model looks like. We understood how to harness atomic power before we even understood sociology. So sociology is such a concept, such a subject, that it is so difficult to understand. Humanity is still grasping, is still struggling to understand human behavior. Psychology, sociology, these are very new subjects. There is very limited literature. And when I started exploring, when I ventured into this journey, when I started exploring the concept, I found very, very limited literature which I could bank on. So today I'm trying to, apart from leadership, I'm going to show you the other face of leadership, and that is power. Because leadership and power go hand in hand. Power is the other face of the same coin. When I started exploring power, I stumbled upon 4 concepts, 4 ideal models on how power should be. These 4 models you can see in front of you. Now, when I started looking at these models, I can distinguish them based on whether the person is individual, has the individualistic approach or the collective approach. Whether the person who wields power has got an ideology or whether he is leading with the knowledge that he has or she has. The first model perhaps was given by Plato or Socrates. The way it totally depends on the way that you look at it. The ideal model that he gave is called as the philosopher king. The Greek philosophers, starting from Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, even Alexander the Great, they all talked about this concept of philosopher king. And they believe that the person should have the collective approach. Rather than putting themselves ahead of others, they should put their society ahead of others, people ahead of them. But they should lead. They should lead with their wisdom, with the knowledge that they have. The animal spirit of this philosopher king can be depicted by a lion in the jungle. Lion is not very famous among other species in the jungle, but it has the requisite knowledge. When it wants to hunt, it knows where to hunt. In modern day, when I look at philosopher king, there is no better example than Manmohan Singh. Manmohan Singh was an economist, someone who led the turnaround of India. But was Manmohan Singh really popular? No, he was not. In fact, when he led the economic reforms of India in 1991, every newspaper criticized him. There were op-eds written at length criticizing Manmohan Singh. Mainly because people thought that he does not have the requisite knowledge. And Plato himself always said that those who are leading and have an ideal model of philosopher king, they will be very infamous among people. And his story is, and he explains it with the famous story called as Caves of Allegory, where what happens is, he explains it, and he goes that, imagine that there are prisoners who have been put in the cave. Their hands are tied, and they are looking on the opposite side of the cave. The opening is on the back, and there is fire lit behind them. That fire is imparting a shadow on the wall of the cave. These prisoners, they look at the shadow and they believe them to be humans. They believe them to be the real part of the world. That is their world. They keep on looking at it. If anyone passes by the cave, they would perceiving it to be the voices coming from the shadow. And he says that what if one of that prisoner breaks the shackles comes out of the cave and looks at all the colors of the world, he would go and start telling his fellow prisoners that world is not what you perceive it to be. The world is very different. The shadows that you are looking at it is not the world. And he would say, the prisoners would reply him that he has gone insane. The world is only shadows. The world is only these voices that come from the background. And that is why it is always that the philosopher kings, those who have the wisdom, those who have the knowledge, will remain unpopular. I do realize that all of us are corporate leaders here. If I have to give an analogy of a corporate entity which displays philosopher king attributes, then there is no better example than Google or Alphabet, depends on whatever you want to call it. Hugely knowledgeable corporation has the data of every one of us. Anyone who uses Chrome, Maps, or any other app that Google has developed. But does it really have the same amount of accolades as any other companies? I doubt. So this is the concept of philosopher king. Now, while I was explaining the concept of the story of Manmohan Singh, I also want to tell you the pitfalls that Pakistan's neighboring country, India's neighboring country, Pakistan, they also tried to do the same experiment. They brought in Shaukat Aziz, hugely experienced guy, hugely someone who knew inside out of an economy. But what he did with the economy of Pakistan is really condemnable. What he did with the economy, its impacts are even felt today. So two countries used the same power model of a philosopher king, brought two people. Manmohan Singh made India juggernaut, economic juggernaut. On the other hand, Shaukat Aziz, Pakistan, are in a debt trap, which it looks like it is never going to come out. So philosopher king, while someone might be tempted to say that probably this is the best model, it has its pitfalls. It has its pitfalls. And so are the other power models. Now let's look at the second one, which is Niccolo Machiavelli's Prince. Now this model is based on someone who has the knowledge, but is driven by individualism. That person puts himself ahead of the others. The currency that a prince deploys can be best described as cunning, deceitful, someone who believes that end justify the means, someone who is driven by that. If I want to do something, I should not be scared to do anything, whether it is ethical or moral. And he gave his book, Prince, back in the 15th century. He himself died, but that book became a legend. Prince is one of the most well-read books in the foreign policies of the world. Almost all countries, the foreign ministers, they like to read Prince. The best example to describe a prince is Henry Kissinger. The person who led the foreign policy of US post World War II. The person who actually led America into the Cold War. And that is the time when US foreign policy can be seen as diverging from its own principle of life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. Simon Sinek, who is one of the very famous leadership professors, he himself criticized US foreign policy, that US foreign policy shifted from principle-based policy to a more pragmatic one where everything becomes legal. And we see that during Cold War, US did not stay away from leading coups, from doing regime change operations, selling weapons to terrorist organizations. Everything was legal for them. And who was the architect of that? Henry Kissinger, a prince. He himself describes Prince as his model. In terms of the corporations, the best example to describe is that of Facebook, Meta. We do know that it harnesses all of our data. All the people who are subscribed to Facebook or Meta, they harness their data. But what it does with that, we have seen it. Cambridge Analytica scandal is there for us to see. In Machiavelli's own writing, he describes a prince to be fox. Someone who can hunt whenever it wants, and nothing is far-fetched from that animal. The third model on power was given by Fredrick Nietzsche, and that is called as Übermensch. And the animal spirit to describe that is that of a hawk. Now, I was tempted to use another animal, but the reason that I'm using hawk because there is a famous subcontinent philosopher named Muhammad Iqbal, Allama Muhammad Iqbal. He gave a concept of khudi, which is pretty much the same concept of Übermensch, and he called it a hawk. He described his philosophy of khudi through hawk. And these kind of people, they believe that what they describe is right. For them, they are right. Everything starts from them. They are not scared to set their own standards. You love them or you hate them. But these guys develop their power based on putting themselves first. Perhaps Elon Musk fits the bill of an Übermensch. Now, if I ask how many people are a fan of Elon Musk or how of them do not, I think the house would be split. Mainly because these are the kind of characters who you really feel that they either do something very good and something terribly wrong. And that is why they get mixed reviews. To explain the corporate power, I think Apple fittingly fits the bill of an Übermensch, a corporation which has set its own standards, does things which other people may not like it. For example, when they started charging their customers for the charger, I thought it was a very nasty move. But who is there to stop Apple? Because they are following the corporate behavior of an Übermensch. What they do becomes the standard. Now, again, as usual with the case with the other power models, people may say like, what happens? Like, it is one of the models. The thing is, it has a lot of downsides. Hitler used to idealize Fredrick Nietzsche. In fact, Fredrick Nietzsche's daughter used to advise Hitler. Caesar, in Fredrick Nietzsche's own writing, Caesar was his ideal character. Napoleon again one. All these characters in history, which Nietzsche idealized, they wreak havoc across Europe, and not only in the world, across the world. So would someone like to do that? And again, those who are aware of the philosophy of Allama Iqbal, they also need to reflect back that the concept of khudi, which is essentially what Übermensch said, does that really fit the bill? Now, after looking at all these three models, I come upon the fourth one, which is the discussion topic of my book, and it is called as sage. Now, this concept of sage is not something that is new. It has been in our discussion point. The Stoic philosophers were the first proponents of sage. Recently, Arthur Schopenhauer gave the concept of sage, but they described sage as a way of life. A way where people who have the power, they are internally satisfied. They have inner peace with themselves. But what is their ideology? What I am trying to describe, that these guys have the tendency to bring about a change, to bring about things which other power models cannot do. In terms of the corporate power, I see none better example than NVIDIA. Now, NVIDIA recently became one of the biggest capped corporations on the Wall Street. Briefly, it went back to third number, I guess now. I was listening to the interview of Jensen, which he gave back in 2005. That was the time when NVIDIA was never on the cards of anyone. People used to look upon IBM and AMD, but NVIDIA was always discounted. It hardly had 10% of the market cap of IBM. And he goes, in his interview, he says that since the advent of computing has solved two problems only. He says that the typewriter has been replaced by Microsoft Word, and the calculator has been replaced by Microsoft Excel. But he says that humanity's biggest problem, that is art and depicting what their inherent qualities are, the computing has not been able to solve that. And that is when he said that he is going to focus on graphics card. For years, he said that we will never build a microprocessor for the CPU. We will have a graphics card only. And from there, it started building its power. It initially became very famous among the gamers. And then the person kept his ideology. NVIDIA kept its ideology and kept on forwarding. And now, when we talk about the AI revolution knocking on our door, the enabler of that revolution is none other than NVIDIA. Now imagine someone 20 years before AI revolution was talking about it, he knew what was going to happen. Because that person was driven by collectivism, was driven by principles, was driven by an ideology. Now, apart from these four models, there are some other models that have been given by few people. So for example, there is a concept of Gen Z, which is given by Confucius, model of Zen given by Taoism. But all these models, they fit into one of these four models. Now before I lose sight and I see people losing interest, I want to remind you back that from where we started with the beginning of humanity. We talked that how humans came together to form large association of people. Then I talked about the question came, who is going to lead these vast association of people, and that is where power came into being. Then I introduced you to the four models on power. And then I am not talking about the concept of sage. Now, if you want to know more about the sage or what sage is all about, then this book does not talk about what a sage is. It talks about the how of sage. So if you want to know what a sage is, what is the way of life of a sage, then I recommend you to read one of the Stoic books, or Arthur Schopenhauer is a good read. But these guys have their limitations. These guys are only talking about a way of life. They are not talking about how a sage actually disrupts the society he lives in. So if you want to know the how of a sage, how he triggers a change in the society, then that is the book. Now in the book, apart from talking about the sage, I look at why people like power. When Henry Kissinger says that power is a great aphrodisiac, then we want to know why he says that. Why there are few people among us, their life goal becomes erecting power, having their own power. I also talk about who pursues power. So we are around 100 people in the hall. Is there a way to understand how many of us are likely candidate to pursue the path of power? And that model is there in the book. I also talk about the corporate power. In the book, I've talked about it briefly. There are three overarching corporate strategies for corporate power, and everything just seeps into it. Polarified forces is also one of the mechanisms. So, and I intend to write another book specifically designed for corporate power. But in this book, you will see shades of where I'm going to take my future book towards. I also talk about the types of power, that when someone gains power, from where do they source it, and how they actually use that power, what are the pathways of power. Then I talk about the power game theory. why power is a great struggle, why feuds and struggles happen. When we navigate office politics, how that game theory plays out, whatever action we take, how our colleague on the other side starts working against us. So I tackle this problem of power game theory in the book. I also talk about the goal of power, that what power does, what goal is achieved when you have grasped power, and what you should use to achieve your goal. And I talk about these disruption, innovation, transformation, turnaround, acquisition, and merger in the book as well. And these 6 words that I've written here, they are very similar to the words that we use in the corporate world as well. In the last chapter of the book, I talk about when power becomes evil. So when guys like Lord Acton says that power corrupts, I specifically have a dedicated theme on that. Because I think something that we need to understand is when power corrupts, what are the conditions of it? What triggers that change? What happens during that time? And is there a way to predict which person is going to become evil when given power? And on that note, I thank you all.